The next idea I'm going to talk about has to do a little bit more with the discussion board you had. Duplicity theory is a very interesting idea. Duplicity theory basically says that in your eyes you have different sensory receptors, the rods and cones, and that it's the makeup, the neuroanatomical structures of the rods and cones, the architecture of the rods and cones that'll actually determine that each one of these receptors has different functions and does different things better. So first, if we want to start with this idea of seeing better at night, the rods actually do that a lot better, and that is basically explained. You turn to page 54 of your book. If you've ever been in your bedroom before and you're in there for about a half an hour and then let's say somebody else comes in the room, it's kind of funny. You watch them, you can see everything they're doing, and many times they stumble, they bump into things, and you can see exactly what's going to happen before it occurs. They can't. And the question is, why does that occur? Well, the reason that occurs is because you've been in the dark for such a long period of time that it seems that your rods are basically able to perceive even just a little bit of light in a dark room. And your rods can do this within the period of about 20 minutes. If you look on page 54, you can see the cones can do this a bit as well, but they kind of plateau at a much higher level, so they really can't see very much after only 5 minutes or so. So it's really your rods that are doing that in a better way. So the rods do that better. They are going through, if you look on page 55, you can add a little outline to this. They go through a process called visual pigment regeneration, which allows them to basically work better when there's just a little bit of light. There's another explanation of this as well, and I put a little picture under this, but in your book, if you turn to page, where is it, 59, there's another explanation of this. Basically, in my figure 3, it turns out that the rods are on the peripheral portion of your eyes, so if you're watching things at night, it's best to watch in the peripheral portion of your vision. That the rods basically, all the rods, there are tons of rods in your eyes, and they basically summate to bipolar cells in your retina. And so if there's just a little bit of light coming in to each one of these rods, they kind of add all that light energy up, and that gives you the ability to see well when it's dark out. So the rods look better, work better when it's dark. So they go through this process of visual pigment regeneration at a quicker rate. If you eat a lot of carrots, you see better at night. Let's see what else it says about visual pigment regeneration. In your book, you can add some information about it, but the rods are the ones doing this very well, and that's what allows this to happen. Other species do this even better than we do. Species like cats can do this very quickly. On the other hand, the cones, it turns out the cones are very good for seeing color and very good for acuity. And the reason the cones are good at this, first, if we go to color vision, it turns out the cones have in them different wavelength receptors, photoreceptors if you call them, short, medium, and long length. And so these basically correspond to blue, green, and red. So your cones can see very well in the bright situation, and they can discriminate between the different colors of the spectrum. The rods are monochromatic, meaning they only perceive white versus black, so they cannot perceive colors at all. The other very interesting thing about the cones is your cones are really fixated on the center portion of your eye. Your rods, there are a lot of rods in your P-A-R-A, fovea. In the peripheral portion of your vision, the cones are really focused on the center portion in your fovea. And it's your fovea that really does a lot of the fine-tune reading things. So acuity is much better with the cones. And the reason for this, and once again, if you look at my little picture, and in your book again, I don't know if it's quite as clear there, The cones basically make linear connections all the way from the eye all the way back to the occipital lobe, the striate cortex and the occipital lobe. So duplicity theory basically explains things by saying rods and cones basically have different cytoarchitecture, structure of the pathways here. The cytoarchitecture of the rods is they summate. And by summating, they can take just a little bit of light and see very well at night. The cones, on the other hand, see very well in light, and when it's light, you can pick up different colors and have better acuity for reading, and that's what the cones do better. So it's the cytoarchitecture that basically has a lot to do with this. So hopefully that makes sense to you. A couple of other things to add from chapter 4. Let's see. We move ahead a few pages here. What do we got? Some of these illusions that I think I was showing you. It is the thought of a movement called the Gestalt psychology movement, that perception of objects don't just work through bottom-up processes, that there is something to be said about the whole does not equal to the sum of its parts. So what I would like you to do is kind of outline some of the Gestalt laws on page 105. Look at the Dalmatian that you can see in the picture there. And then if you turn to page 107, it's kind of funny, the 13 hidden faces in the picture. See if you can kind of pick those up. Write down what the laws of Gestalt are for good continuity, common region, and so forth, that allow you to see things. So the Gestalt perspective is very different than bottom up and top down. It's the whole does not equal the sum of its part. And finally, last but not least, if you turn to chapter 7 of your book, and that can be used to explain illusions as well. In chapter 7, I believe it's chapter 7, chapter 7 talks about the ecological approach that Gibson brought to mind with movement and perception. And with Gibson, the idea was you can perceive things basically because you're moving through time. When you're driving, if you look at figure 7.1, it's not, you don't perceive something just from staying still. It's the movement and the information you're getting from moving and interacting with the environment that really allows you to perceive the world. And so they've actually talked about the focus of expansion there and the optic flow that's changing in your eyes. As you get older, you tend to respond a little bit more slowly to that. On page, 160, they talk about driving experiments and walking experiments, and it's not just you standing there staring at something, but it's the movement through the visual array that really gives you a lot of clues to what you're perceiving in the world. And they've actually found that there are neurons in the brain, as it's pointed out on 161, the optic flow neurons that seem to correspond to this. In what area of the brain do they say? The superior temporal areas. It seems as if the temporal lobe is also involved in movement and optical information as well, not just the occipital lobe. So what I'd like you to do is basically take the information I've shared here and make a good detailed outline using the book information and what I've shared acoustically with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.